The rain hammered down mercilessly as Shadow collapsed onto the sodden earth. For 3 days, the German shepherd had maintained his vigil outside Sergeant Mike Callahan's gate through torrential downpours, through blistering heat, through the officer's cold rejection. Now, his once powerful frame trembled with exhaustion, ribs visible beneath matted fur. The dog's amber eyes, though clouded with pain, remained fixed on the house where the man who despised him lived alone. Inside, Callahan watched through rain-streaked windows, jaw clenched tight enough to crack teeth. He'd spent decades building walls nothing could breach, not colleagues, not neighbors, certainly not some stray mutt. Yet something in the animal's stubborn loyalty had awakened something long buried. What happened next would leave the entire town of Oak Ridge speechless. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from. Now, let's continue with the story. Oak Ridge. Arizona wasn't the kind of place that made the Weather Channel, except during September's unpredictable monsoon season. The small desert town. Population 8,246 sat in a valley that transformed from dusty beige to raging rivers when the storms came. This year's deluge had been particularly brutal, washing out the eastern bridge and flooding the lower neighborhoods. Sergeant Mike Callahan had served the Oak Ridge Police Department for 27 years. At 58, his weathered face carried the deep lines of a man who'd seen too much and smiled too little. His colleagues called him Stone Cold Callahan, behind his back, a nickname he'd earned through unwavering professionalism and emotional detachment. 6 years a widower, he lived alone in a modest ranch house on Sycamore Street, its yard meticulously maintained but devoid of the warmth that makes a house a home. The neighbors knew his routine up at 5 a.m. sharp. Patrol car backing out at 6:15, return precisely at 7 p.m., lights out by 10. They also knew not to mention dogs in his presence. His refusal to work with the department's K-9 unit was legendary, though few knew why. Rumor had it he'd once been a handler himself. But something had happened. Something bad. What most didn't know was that behind Callahan's bedroom closet door hung a child-sized police uniform, preserved like a museum piece, or that a bedroom down the hall remained untouched for 15 years, dust gathering on model airplanes and baseball trophies. The name Daniel, carved into a wooden door, hinted at the ghost that haunted Sergeant Callahan's life. On the other side of Callahan's fence lived Martha Wilson, 73, with hands gnarled from arthritis and a tongue sharp enough to cut glass. From her porch swing, Martha observed the neighborhood like a sentry, her unofficial animal rescue operation making her house a sanctuary for strays. She'd tried to engage Callahan for years without success, though she'd never stopped trying. Neither of them could have predicted how a half-starved German shepherd would change everything. The dog had appeared after the floods lean but muscular, despite his hunger, with intelligent eyes and peculiar mannerisms that suggested formal training. Something about him was different from ordinary strays. Martha had noticed it immediately. Callahan would notice it too, though he'd wish he hadn't. The first time Sergeant Mike Callahan encountered the German shepherd was during a routine patrol of the flood-damaged Eastern District. 3 days of cleanup had barely made a dent in the devastation. Callahan sat in his cruiser, documenting water levels for the emergency management team, when movement caught his eye, a large dog emerging from between 2 damaged houses. His body tensed instinctively. Even after all these years, the reaction was automatic, visceral. His right hand drifted toward his holster before he caught himself. The German Shepherd stopped about 20 feet from the patrol car. Unlike most strays, it didn't slink away or approach with desperate hunger. Instead, it sat, perfectly still, at attention, almost like it was waiting for orders. "Get out of here!" Callahan shouted through his partially opened window. The dog didn't move, didn't flinch, just watched him with those unsettling amber eyes. A memory flashed, unbidden, snarling teeth, screams, blood on concrete. Mike's heart hammered against his ribs as sweat beaded on his forehead despite the air conditioning. He was 7 years old again, pinned against the playground fence as Mrs. Abernathy's Rottweiler lunged repeatedly, teeth snapping inches from his face. "Hey there! Pup you lost!" The voice of Officer Jenny Ramirez, new to the force, broke through his momentary paralysis. She approached from the community center, where she'd been coordinating volunteer efforts. "Stay back," Callahan barked, harsher than intended. "That's a stray. Could be dangerous." Ramirez slowed but kept approaching. "He looks trained. Sarge, look at how he's sitting." The dog remained in perfect position, eyes now tracking between the two officers. Its coat was dirty and matted in places, but Callahan could see the animal was indeed a purebred German Shepherd, probably abandoned during the evacuation. "I don't care if it's the reincarnation of Rin Tin Tin," Callahan said, exiting his vehicle but keeping the door between himself and the dog. "Animal control's backed up with flood rescues. Just leave it." He stamped his foot and waved his arms. "Go on. Get—" The dog tilted its head slightly but remained seated. "I think he likes you," Ramirez said with a grin. "Well, the feeling ain't mutual." Callahan turned his back on both of them and walked to the community center. When he emerged 30 minutes later with his paperwork complete, the dog was gone. Good riddance, he thought. But as he drove back to the station, he spotted it in his rearview mirror, keeping pace about half a block behind his cruiser. Whenever he stopped at an intersection, the dog would sit, waiting patiently until he moved again. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, pressing the accelerator harder. At the station, Callahan slammed his car door and marched inside without looking back. Chief Williams was waiting in the bullpen. "Water's receding on Main Street," Callahan reported, hanging up his hat. "But we've still got significant flooding east of Cottonwood Drive." "Good work," Williams nodded. "How about those displaced families at the high school?" Before Callahan could answer, Officer Blake Thompson burst in, grinning like a fool. "Hey, Sarge, looks like you've got an admirer." Callahan followed Thompson to the window. There, sitting perfectly at attention in the front parking lot, was the German Shepherd. "That mutt followed me from East End," Callahan growled. "Don't look like any mutt I've ever seen," said Dispatch Sergeant Dorothy Miller, peering over her reading glasses. "That there's a working dog if I ever saw one. Military, maybe. Don't care what it is. Someone call animal control." "They're still cleaning out the shelter from the flood," Thompson said. "Said they can't take any more until tomorrow at least." Throughout the afternoon, Callahan caught his colleagues sneaking out with water bowls and beef jerky. Each time, he scowled but said nothing. The dog accepted their offerings politely, but never moved from its post near the entrance. At precisely 6:30 p.m., Callahan emerged from the station, deliberately ignoring the dog as he walked to his cruiser. In his peripheral vision, he saw it stand and stretch. Sure enough, as he drove away, the German shepherd followed, maintaining that same respectful distance. "This ends now," Callahan muttered, suddenly swerving into the parking lot of Oak Ridge Grocery. He killed the engine and waited until the dog approached the lot, then exploded from his vehicle. "Listen here," he shouted, pointing his finger at the startled animal. "I don't want you. I don't like you. I don't need you hanging around. Go find someone else to bother." Several shoppers turned to stare. Martha Wilson, emerging with her groceries, shook her head in disgust. "For heaven's sake, Michael Callahan, it's just a dog," she called. "And from the looks of him, one that's been through hell." "Stay out of this, Martha," Callahan warned. The dog had backed up several paces at Callahan's outburst but hadn't run. It sat again, head slightly lowered but eyes still fixed on him. "Fine. Have it your way." Callahan got back in his cruiser and drove home, taking 3 unnecessary detours and accelerating whenever he spotted the dog in his mirrors. At home, he slammed his front door and locked it firmly, drawing all the blinds before collapsing into his recliner. He didn't look outside again until after dinner. When he took his trash to the side yard, the German shepherd sat at his front gate as if it had been there all along. "You've got to be kidding me," Callahan muttered. He approached the fence, trash bag still in hand. "Shoo, go away." The dog stood, took 2 steps back, then sat again. "I said go." Callahan grabbed the garden hose and sprayed a jet of water toward the animal. The dog yelped once but stood its ground, water streaming from its already dirty coat. From next door, Martha's voice rang out. "Michael James Callahan, you stop that right this minute." Callahan dropped the hose, feeling sudden shame heating his neck. Without another word, he stormed back inside, slamming the door with enough force to rattle the windows. That night, he dreamed of Daniel for the first time in months. His 12-year-old son running ahead on a sunny day, turning to wave, his smile brighter than the Arizona sun. Then the dream shifted, as it always did, to screams and blood and helplessness. Callahan woke at 3 a.m., drenched in sweat. Through his bedroom window, he could see it had started to rain, a gentle patter that would soon become the heavy downpour the forecasters had predicted. Against his better judgment, he moved to the living room window and peered through the blinds. The German shepherd still sat at attention by his gate, rain already soaking through its fur. It wasn't seeking shelter, wasn't trying to dig under the fence, just sitting, watching, waiting, as if it had all the time in the world. "Stubborn damn animal," Callahan muttered, letting the blinds snap shut. "You'll be gone by morning." But even as he crawled back into bed, a strange, unwelcome feeling settled in his chest, something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Respect. The first light of dawn brought no relief from the rain. Callahan's alarm blared at 5 a.m. sharp, and he moved through his morning routine with mechanical precision coffee brewing, toast in the toaster, uniform pressed and ready. Only when he'd finished his breakfast did he allow himself a glance through the front window. The German shepherd remained at the gate, soaked to the bone. The animal sat in the same attentive posture, though Callahan could see subtle tremors running through its frame. Rainwater had created a muddy puddle beneath the dog, yet it made no attempt to seek higher ground or shelter. "Damn fool animal," Callahan muttered, dropping the curtain. As he knotted his tie, his eyes drifted to the single-framed photograph on his dresser Daniel at 10 years old, grinning broadly in an oversized police cap. His son had been obsessed with following in his footsteps, particularly after a school visit from the K-9 unit. Daniel had peppered the handlers with questions, begging Callahan to let him volunteer at the training center. "When you're older," Callahan had promised. A promise that would never be fulfilled. The memory sent a familiar pain through his chest. He turned the photo face down, as he sometimes did on particularly difficult mornings. Outside. Callahan opened his umbrella and walked briskly to his car, eyes fixed straight ahead. Still, he couldn't help but notice the dog tracking his movement, head turning steadily as Callahan passed. No barking, no whining, just that unwavering attention. "You won't be here when I get back," Callahan said aloud, more to convince himself than the dog. "Even you're not that stupid." Martha Wilson stood on her covered porch in a floral housecoat, arms crossed over her chest. "That poor creature's been there all night in this downpour," she called out. Callahan pretended not to hear, climbing into his cruiser. "At least leave some water for it." "Michael," Martha's voice carried through the rain, "have you no heart at all?" He drove away, windshield wipers fighting the deluge, the image of the sodden dog fading in his rearview mirror. At the station, the mood was subdued. The rain had intensified overnight, threatening areas that had been spared in the initial flooding. Callahan threw himself into work, volunteering for the worst assignments, checking riverbanks, coordinating with fire rescue, anything to keep his mind occupied. Around noon, Officer Thompson sidled up to him in the break room. "So, your shadow's still following you. Sarge?" "What?" "The German Shepherd. Jenkins drove by your place looking for you, said that dog's still sitting at your gate. Hasn't moved an inch." Callahan grunted, pouring coffee with more force than necessary. "Must have really taken a shine to you," Thompson continued, oblivious to Callahan's darkening expression. "Weird thing is, Jenkins tried to give it some jerky, but it wouldn't take it. Just kept staring at your house." "It's just a stray," Callahan snapped. "It'll move on when it gets hungry enough." "Don't know. Sarge, doesn't act like any stray I've seen." Before Callahan could respond, Chief Williams entered, shaking rainwater from his jacket. "Listen up, everyone. Just got word from Sheriff's Department that transport accident during the flash flood. Turns out they were moving 3 military working dogs from Davis-Monthan to the training facility in Phoenix." The room quieted. "Military dogs?" Thompson asked. "Highly trained German shepherds," Williams confirmed. "Air Force says they were being relocated when their transport got caught in the flash flood near Sycamore Creek. Handler survived, but the dogs were lost. They're asking all law enforcement to keep an eye out." Thompson looked meaningfully at Callahan, who avoided his gaze. "Any distinguishing features?" asked Officer Ramirez. "Military tattoo in the ear, apparently, and special training vests. Though those might have been lost in the flood." Williams pinned a notice to the bulletin board. "They're valuable animals trained for combat operations and search and rescue. Air Force wants them back ASAP." Throughout the afternoon, Callahan found his thoughts drifting to the dog at his gate. Could it be one of the missing military dogs, the intelligence in those amber eyes, the disciplined posture? It made a certain sense. Still, he reasoned, even if it was, that wasn't his problem. By shift's end, the rain had intensified to sheets of water that turned roads into rivers. Flash flood warnings blared from the station's emergency radio. Callahan drove home slowly, windshield wipers struggling against the torrent. As he turned onto Sycamore Street, his headlights caught the reflective eyes of the German shepherd still at his gate, still sitting at attention despite the punishing conditions. The dog looked markedly worse than that morning fur plastered to its frame, revealing a thinner body than Callahan had initially realized. Mud splattered up its legs and belly. He parked in his driveway and sat for a long moment, engine idling, wipers still slapping furiously against the windshield. From her porch, Martha Wilson watched, a yellow slicker protecting her from the elements. A large umbrella rested against her railing. Alongside what looked like a bowl of food, Callahan sighed, steeled himself, and exited his vehicle. The rain hit him like cold needles as he made his way to the gate, stopping a few feet from where the dog sat shivering. "You still here?" he asked gruffly. The dog's ears perked up slightly, but it maintained its position. "You know, normal dogs would have found shelter by now," Callahan said, feeling ridiculous for talking to the animal. "What's wrong with you, anyway?" Martha approached, holding the umbrella. "Been trying to give him shelter all day. Offered him food, too. Won't budge." "Not my problem," Callahan said, though with less conviction than before. "I rigged up a tarp over by the hedge," Martha continued, ignoring his comment. "Least the poor thing could get out of this rain, but he won't move unless you tell him to." "Me? Why would he listen to me?" "Because he's chosen you, you thick-headed fool." Martha thrust the umbrella at him. "Here, at least give him some cover while you convince him to use the shelter." Callahan hesitated, then took the umbrella. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, but moved closer to the gate. The dog's attention intensified, eyes fixed on Callahan's face. "Listen," Callahan said, feeling absurd. "There's shelter over there." He pointed to the blue tarp Martha had rigged between bushes. "Go on. Get under it." The dog followed his gesture but didn't move. "Go," Callahan pointed more emphatically. "Under the tarp. Now." To his surprise, the dog rose stiffly and limped to the makeshift shelter. It sat underneath, still facing Callahan's house, water dripping from its coat. "Well, I'll be," Martha said. "Told you he'd listen to you." Callahan handed back the umbrella and trudged to his front door, uncomfortably aware of the dog's eyes following him. Inside, he changed into dry clothes and poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey, which he drank standing at his kitchen window. From there, he could see the edge of the tarp and the German shepherd, which had crept back out to sit in the rain once more, eyes fixed on Callahan's house. "Unbelievable," he muttered. That night, sleep eluded him. The storm intensified, wind howling around the eaves as thunder cracked overhead. Every half hour, Callahan found himself at different windows, checking on the dog. Each time, he found it in the same position, sitting upright in the driving rain, seemingly impervious to the elements. Around midnight, during a particularly violent thunderclap, Callahan found himself on his front porch, watching as lightning illuminated the drenched animal. "You're going to die out here. You know that?" he called into the storm. "For what, I'm nobody to you." The dog's ears perked up at his voice, but it maintained its position. Back inside, Callahan pulled a box from his hall closet, one he hadn't opened in years. Inside were Daniel's things, carefully preserved. Photos, baseball cards, the junior deputy badge he'd been so proud of. Beneath these lay a faded photograph Callahan had almost forgotten Daniel at a police department open house, kneeling beside a German Shepherd puppy, face alight with joy. "This is Rex," Daniel had told everyone who would listen that day. "He's training to be a police dog. Dad says maybe I can help train dogs like him when I'm older." Callahan's throat tightened. He returned the photo to the box and closed it firmly, as if sealing away the memory itself. Outside, the rain continued to fall, and the dog continued its vigil. Morning broke with a fresh deluge that turned Callahan's front yard into a shallow pond. He'd barely slept, his dreams haunted by images of Daniel alternating with the rain-soaked German Shepherd. When his alarm blared at 5 a.m., he was already awake, staring at the ceiling. Callahan's first glance out the window confirmed what he already knew: the dog remained at its post, though its condition had deteriorated visibly. Its once alert posture had slumped, head hanging lower, body trembling continuously. Yet still it sat facing his house, a picture of stubborn dedication that stirred something uncomfortable in Callahan's chest. He dressed quickly and was about to head for the door when the telephone rang. Chief Williams' voice crackled through the receiver. "Mike, we're calling in everyone today. This storm's turning into a real monster. National Weather Service is saying we might get another 5 inches before noon." "I'll be right in," Callahan replied, already reaching for his raincoat. "One more thing," Williams added. "Got a call from Martha Wilson. Says you've got one of those missing military dogs at your place." Callahan's jaw tightened. "Martha needs to mind her own business. Well, Air Force is sending someone to check it out, if it is one of theirs. They want it back pronto. Those dogs cost upwards of $50,000 to train." "Fine by me," Callahan said, hanging up more forcefully than necessary. Outside, the rain hammered down with renewed intensity. Callahan paused on his porch, looking toward the gate where the German Shepherd sat submerged up to its belly in muddy water. Its coat hung in sodden clumps, ribs clearly visible with each labored breath. Before he could stop himself, Callahan descended the porch steps and approached the gate, the dog's head lifted at his approach, a barely perceptible wag of its tail disturbing the water's surface. "You're killing yourself. You know that," Callahan said gruffly. "And for what?" The dog stared back, amber eyes cloudy with exhaustion, but still focused entirely on him. With a muttered curse, Callahan returned to his house and emerged with a stainless steel bowl of water, which he placed just inside the gate. The dog watched, but didn't move. "It's water," Callahan said, pointing at the bowl. "Drink." Only when he made the explicit gesture did the dog drag itself forward to lap weakly at the water, eyes still fixed on Callahan as if seeking approval. "I'm not your master," Callahan said, backing away. "Air Force is coming for you. You'll be back where you belong soon enough." Martha Wilson stood watching from her porch, arms crossed. As Callahan headed for his car, she approached, wrapped in a yellow raincoat several sizes too large. "Finally showing some humanity. Michael," she called over the rain, "save the lecture. Martha, I've got work to do." "What you've got is a traumatized animal dying in your front yard because it thinks you're its person." Martha's voice had lost its usual acerbic edge, replaced by something softer, almost pleading. That dog's been through hell. Same as you. Callahan paused, hand on his car door. You don't know anything about me. I know grief when I see it. Martha replied quietly. Been looking at it in my mirror for 40 years. Ever since my Thomas died in Vietnam. This isn't about grief, Callahan said flatly. Isn't it? Martha stepped closer, rain streaming down her lined face. I watched you after Daniel died. Watched you wall yourself off from everyone and everything that might hurt you again. Watched you stop living. Callahan felt heat rise in his neck despite the cold rain. You have no right. I have every right. Martha cut him off. Because I did the same thing when I lost my boy. Shut down. Shut everyone out. Would have stayed that way, too, if it hadn't been for a three-legged tabby cat that wouldn't take no for an answer. She nodded toward the German shepherd. Sometimes the good Lord sends us what we need, not what we think we want. It's just a dog, Martha. And I was just a broken-hearted mother. Until I wasn't. Martha turned back toward her house. That animal has chosen you. Michael Callahan. Question is, are you man enough to be chosen? Callahan drove to work in seething silence. Martha's words echoing unwelcomed in his mind. The station was a flurry of activity phones ringing, radios crackling with reports of flooded streets and stranded motorists. He threw himself into the chaos, volunteering for the most demanding assignments. By mid-morning, he found himself at the Eastern Evacuation Center, coordinating transportation for elderly residents from the Sunnyside retirement community. As he checked names off his clipboard, Officer Ramirez approached, rain dripping from her poncho. "How's your shadow doing?" "Sarge?" she asked. "Not now, Ramirez." "Just asking." She shrugged. "Thompson said it looked pretty rough this morning. If it is one of those military dogs, seems like someone should be taking care of it." "Air Force is sending someone," Callahan replied curtly. "Must be something special about you." Ramirez persisted. "For it to stick around like that." "Drop it." "Officer." "Yes, sir." Ramirez turned to go, then hesitated. "My brother served in Afghanistan. Said those military dogs would die for their handlers without a second thought. Loyalty like that, it's rare." Callahan didn't respond, turning back to his clipboard with unnecessary focus. But as the morning wore on, he found his thoughts repeatedly returning to the dog sitting in the rain outside his home. Around noon, Chief Williams called him back to the station. A tall, uniformed Air Force officer waited in the conference room, accompanied by a civilian in a waterproof jacket bearing the logo of a military contractor. "Sergeant Callahan," the officer introduced himself as Major Lewis. "I understand you may have found one of our missing assets." "There's a German shepherd at my property," Callahan acknowledged. "Been there since yesterday." The civilian stepped forward, extending a tablet showing photographs of 3 similar-looking dogs in military vests. "Was it any of these animals?" Callahan studied the images. The third dog had the same distinctive markings around its eyes as the one at his gate. "Possibly this one. Hard to tell with all the mud and rain." "That's Sentinel," the civilian said. "One of our most promising trainees. He was being transported with 2 others when the flood hit their vehicle near Sycamore Creek." "What makes these dogs so special?" Callahan asked, trying to keep his tone neutral. "Dual-purpose training," Major Lewis explained. detection and patrol work, with special search and rescue capabilities. Sentinel, in particular, showed extraordinary aptitude for finding people in disaster scenarios. The civilian nodded. His training was nearly complete. We'd invested over a year in his development. His handler, Callahan asked, surprising himself with the question. A shadow crossed Major Lewis's face. Sergeant James Wilson was driving the transport. Got the other handler out, but was swept away trying to release the dogs from their kennels. The name hit Callahan like a physical blow. Wilson, from Oak Ridge. Yes, the major confirmed. Local boy. Joined up after high school. Martha Wilson's son, Callahan said quietly, pieces suddenly falling into place. You know the family? Lewis asked. She's my neighbor. The civilian checked his watch. We should get moving if we want to recover the animal today. This storm's only getting worse. Callahan felt an unexpected reluctance. The dog's in rough shape. Been sitting in the rain for nearly 2 days. We've got a veterinary team standing by at Davis-Monthan, the civilian assured him. Military working dogs are valuable assets. Something in the man's tone, the cold assessment of the animal as property, grated on Callahan. He needs immediate care. There's a vet clinic 5 minutes from my house. Our protocols require your asset might not survive the trip to Davis-Monthan. Callahan interrupted. I've seen dogs die of exposure. It's not pretty. Major Lewis studied him thoughtfully. We'll follow you to your residence. Sergeant, we can make a field assessment there. The drive back to Sycamore Street seemed longer than usual. The windshield wipers struggling against the downpour. Callahan found himself pressing the accelerator harder than was safe on the flooded roads, an unfamiliar urgency building in his chest. As he turned onto his street, he immediately knew something was wrong. The German Shepherd Sentinel was no longer sitting at attention. Instead, the dog lay crumpled on its side in the muddy water, unmoving. Callahan slammed on his brakes and was out of his vehicle before it had fully stopped, splashing through ankle-deep water toward the gate. Behind him, he heard the Air Force vehicle pull up, doors opening. Sentinel. The name left his lips without conscious thought as he reached the fallen animal. The dog's eyes fluttered open at the sound of Callahan's voice. A feeble attempt to lift its head, ending in failure. Its breathing came in shallow, rapid pants. He's in shock, the civilian contractor said, kneeling beside Callahan. Severe dehydration, hypothermia, probably exhaustion too. We need to get him to a vet, Callahan said, already removing his jacket to wrap around the trembling animal. Our transport's better equipped, the contractor began. There's no time. Callahan cut him off, gently sliding his arms beneath the dog's body. Oak Ridge Animal Hospital is 3 minutes from here. To his surprise, Major Lewis nodded. Do it. We'll follow. Sentinel felt alarmingly light in Callahan's arms, his once powerful frame reduced by hunger and exposure. As Callahan lifted him, the dog's head lolled against his chest, amber eyes finding his face. You're going to be okay, Callahan said quietly, carrying the dog to his cruiser's back seat. Hang in there, buddy. As he settled behind the wheel, a vivid memory surfaced carrying Daniel's broken body from the K-9 demonstration area, the boy's blood soaking through his uniform shirt, the crowd's screams echoing in his ears. He'd made the same promise then. You're gonna be okay. A promise he couldn't keep. The drive to Oak Ridge Animal Hospital passed in a blur. Twice. Callahan reached back to touch Sentinel's flank, reassuring himself the dog was still breathing. When they arrived, Dr. Eleanor Reed was waiting at the entrance, alerted by Callahan's radio call. "Severe exposure case," she confirmed after a quick examination on the treatment table. "I need to start IV fluids immediately. Temperature's dangerously low." "Do whatever's necessary," the Air Force major authorized. "Military working dog. High priority." "He hasn't eaten in at least 2 days," Callahan added. "Maybe longer." Dr. Reed worked efficiently, inserting an IV line while her technicians wrapped Sentinel in warming blankets. "What happened to him?" "Flash flood took out his transport," Major Lewis explained. "Been missing since Tuesday, and he's been sitting in the rain outside my house since yesterday morning," Callahan added, surprising himself with the note of guilt in his voice. Dr. Reed's eyebrows rose, but she kept working. "Any idea why?" "That's what I'd like to know," Callahan said, his eyes fixed on Sentinel's face. The dog's eyes had closed, his breathing gradually steadying as warm fluids entered his system. "Well, he's stable for now," Dr. Reed announced after several tense minutes. "But he's not out of the woods. I'd like to keep him overnight at minimum. We'll need to transport him to the base facility as soon as he's stable," the contractor insisted. "That won't be happening today," Dr. Reed said firmly. "Probably not tomorrow either. This animal needs rest and careful monitoring." "I'll stay with him," Callahan heard himself say before he'd consciously formed the thought. 3 pairs of eyes turned to him in surprise. "That's not necessary." "Sergeant," Major Lewis said, "we can assign personnel." "I'll stay," Callahan repeated, more firmly this time. "At least until he's stable." As the others stepped out to complete paperwork, Callahan remained beside the treatment table, one hand resting lightly on Sentinel's flank. The dog's eyes opened briefly, finding Callahan's face before drifting closed again. "Why me?" Callahan whispered. "Out of everyone in Oak Ridge, why pick me?" The answer came several hours later, after Sentinel had been moved to a recovery kennel and Callahan sat nearby in an uncomfortable plastic chair. Major Lewis returned from a series of phone calls, his expression solemn. "I've been in touch with our training facility," he said, taking the chair opposite Callahan. "Trying to understand why Sentinel might have sought you out specifically." Callahan looked up from the sleeping dog. "And Sergeant Wilson was using a unique training protocol with Sentinel for search and rescue imprinting. Handlers sometimes use personal items with distinct scents." Lewis hesitated. According to his commanding officer, Wilson was using items that belonged to a local police officer's son who died in a dog attack years ago. Said the boy had been passionate about police dogs before the incident. Ticky. The room seemed to tilt beneath Callahan. "Daniel," he whispered. "He was using Daniel's things." Lewis nodded slowly. Wilson told his CO he wanted Sentinel to associate finding missing children with the highest priority. Said he had permission from the family to use the items. Martha, Callahan realized. She must have given him Daniel's things. "The theory is that Sentinel recognized your scent from those training items," Lewis continued. "These dogs have extraordinary olfactory memory. After losing his handler in the flood, He sought out the only other familiar scent signature he knew. Callahan stared at the sleeping German shepherd, memories flooding back Daniel begging to visit the Canine Training Center, collecting police dog trading cards, declaring his intention to become a handler when he grew up. Dreams shattered in one horrible afternoon when a seemingly well-trained military dog had broken from its handler during a public demonstration, attacking the closest child. For 15 years, Callahan had channeled his grief into hatred of the animals that took his son. Yet here was a dog that had somehow connected with Daniel's memory, carrying his scent through training exercises designed to save lives. "Will he recover?" Callahan asked, his voice rough. "Dr. Reed thinks so," Lewis replied. "He's young and was in excellent condition before this ordeal. Military dogs are bred for resilience." "And then what happens to him?" Lewis hesitated. "Normally, he'd return to training, but given the circumstances, the trauma of the flood, losing his handler there will need to be evaluations. He might be deemed unsuitable for continued service. And if he is, military working dogs that can't serve are typically adopted out, often to their handlers' families." Lewis's expression softened slightly. "In this case, that would be the Wilsons. Though given Mrs. Wilson's age," Callahan nodded, understanding the unspoken concern. Martha was in her 70s, arthritis limiting her mobility. A young, energetic German shepherd would be too much for her to handle. "I need to make a phone call," Callahan said abruptly, rising from his chair. In the clinic's small lobby, he dialed Martha's number, suddenly desperate to understand. "You knew," he said when she answered, skipping any greeting. "About your son using Daniel's things to train that dog." A long pause followed. "James thought it might help you somehow, eventually," Martha finally said. "Said that dog would be trained to find missing children, to prevent what happened to Daniel from happening to others. Why didn't you tell me?" "Would you have listened?" Martha's voice was gentle. "You've spent 15 years shutting out anything that reminds you of that day. James understood that. Said sometimes healing comes sideways, when we're not looking for it." Callahan's throat tightened. "Your son died trying to save these dogs." "My son died doing what he believed in," Martha corrected. "Just like he lived, just like I taught him." Her voice wavered slightly. "Is the dog, Sentinel, going to be all right?" "Doctor thinks so. I'm staying with him tonight." "Good," Martha said simply. "That's good. Michael." When Callahan returned to the recovery area, he found Sentinel awake, eyes tracking his movement across the room. The dog's tail thumped weakly against the kennel floor. "Hey there," Callahan said quietly, kneeling beside the kennel door. Feeling better, Sentinel's eyes, clearer now, remained fixed on Callahan's face with an intelligence that was almost unnerving. Slowly, deliberately. The dog raised his head and inched forward to gently nudge Callahan's hand with his nose. For the first time in 15 years, Michael Callahan felt the soft fur of a dog beneath his fingers and didn't pull away. By morning, the rain had stopped. Callahan awoke with a stiff neck from sleeping in the plastic chair, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings of the veterinary clinic. Sunlight streamed through the small window, casting a warm rectangle across Sentinel's kennel. The dog was already awake, sitting at attention despite his weakened state. When he saw Callahan stir, his tail thumped against the kennel floor in a steady rhythm. "Well, good morning to you too," Callahan said gruffly, rolling his shoulders to work out the kinks. "Doctor," Reed entered, clipboard in hand, eyebrows rising at the sight of Callahan. "You actually stayed all night. Said I would, didn't I?" Callahan stood, wincing as his back protested. "Most people don't," she replied, opening the kennel to examine Sentinel. The dog submitted to her gentle probing but kept his eyes fixed on Callahan. "His vitals are much improved. Temperature's normal, heart rate steady. He's responding well to the antibiotics." "So he'll be okay, barring complications." Dr. Reed straightened, making notes on her clipboard. "He's severely malnourished, though. Must have been on his own for several days before finding you. I'd like to keep him one more day for observation and to get some more nutrition into him." Callahan nodded, surprising himself with his relief. "I need to check in at the station, but I'll be back. He'll be here." Dr. Reed hesitated, then added, "I've treated police dogs for 15 years. Sergeant Callahan. This one's special. The way he looks at you, that's rare." Outside, Callahan blinked in the harsh sunlight. The storm had passed, leaving Oak Ridge wrung out and steaming in the sudden heat, typical Arizona weather from flood to drought in hours. His uniform from yesterday was rumpled and stained with mud and dog hair. He'd need to go home and change before reporting to the station. The drive down Sycamore Street revealed the storm's aftermath. Debris littered front yards, and several trees had lost large branches. Water still pooled in low areas, though the worst of the flooding had receded. As Callahan pulled into his driveway, he found himself automatically glancing toward his front gate, half expecting to see Sentinel sitting there. Instead, he saw Martha Wilson struggling to drag a fallen branch from her driveway. Without thinking, he redirected his car to the curb in front of her house. "Let me get that," he called, jogging over to take the branch from her gnarled hands. "Well, look who's being neighborly," Martha said, though without her usual sharp edge. "How's our four-legged friend?" "Better. Doctor wants to keep him another day." Callahan dragged the heavy branch to the pile of storm debris at the edge of her property. "Why didn't you tell me about your son? About what he was doing with the dog?" Martha leaned on her cane, studying him with faded blue eyes. "Would it have mattered before now?" Callahan had no answer for that, after 15 years of deliberately avoiding anything to do with working dogs. Would he have listened, or would he have shut down the conversation before it began? As he had so many others, "I need to clean up and get to the station," he said instead. "Call me if you need help with anything else." Martha's knowing smile followed him across the street. At the station, the atmosphere was less frantic than the previous day, though still busy with post-storm operations. Chief Williams looked up from his desk as Callahan entered. "There he is. Heard you played hero for one of those missing military dogs." "Just took him to the vet," Callahan said, uncomfortable with the attention. "Any word on the other two?" Williams shook his head. "Still missing. Air Force has search teams out along the creek, but after this much time..." He left the implication hanging. "How's your rescue doing?" "Recovering. Should be released tomorrow." Callahan hesitated. "Chief, I'd like to take a personal day. First one in 3 years," he added, forestalling any objection. William studied him for a long moment. Something to do with the dog. Yes, Callahan admitted. Take two, William said, surprising him. God knows you've earned them. Just check in with dispatch periodically in case we have another emergency. Callahan nodded his thanks and headed back to his cruiser. Instead of going home, he found himself driving to the animal hospital again. Dr. Reed raised an eyebrow when he appeared barely 2 hours after leaving, but led him back to Sentinel's kennel without comment. The dog was sleeping, his massive head resting on outstretched paws. He looked more peaceful than Callahan had yet seen him, though still too thin, ribs visible beneath his drying coat. Has he eaten? Callahan asked. A little. Not as much as I'd like. Dr. Reed handed him a small bowl of soft food. Maybe he'll take it from you. As if on cue, Sentinel's eyes opened. Seeing Callahan, he raised his head, tail sweeping across the kennel floor. Hey there, Callahan said, kneeling beside the kennel door. Brought you some breakfast. He offered the bowl through the bars. Sentinel sniffed it, then looked at Callahan's face, as if waiting for permission. Go ahead, Callahan said, making a small gesture with his free hand. Eat. Only then did Sentinel begin to eat, slowly at first. Then, with increasing enthusiasm, Dr. Reed watched with professional interest. He's waiting for your commands, she observed. Classic military training. He won't eat, drink, or even move without authorization from his handler. She tilted her head. Or the person he thinks is his handler. Callahan watched as Sentinel finished the food, then looked up expectantly. What happens to him now? After he recovers. The Air Force officer left paperwork. They'll send someone to collect him once I clear him medically. Dr. Reed hesitated, though Major Lewis mentioned there might be other options, depending on how his evaluation goes. Callahan nodded, thinking about what Lewis had said regarding dogs deemed unsuitable for continued service. He reached through the kennel bars to stroke Sentinel's head, still marveling at how natural the gesture felt after so many years of avoiding dogs entirely. I need to look into something, he told Dr. Reed. I'll be back this afternoon. His next stop was the Oak Ridge Police Department's records room, where he pulled the file he'd avoided for 15 years, Daniel's accident. The manila folder was thicker than he remembered, filled with witness statements, medical reports, and photographs he couldn't bring himself to examine. What he sought was on the first page the military working dog's designation and training history. The animal that attacked Daniel had been a Belgian Malinois named Cairo, trained for combat operations at a facility in Texas. Nothing to do with the program that had produced Sentinel. More importantly, buried in the investigation notes was the detail Callahan had blocked from his memory. The dog had been diagnosed with a brain tumor during its autopsy, explaining the uncharacteristic aggression. The animal hadn't been inherently dangerous, it had been sick, in pain, its behavior altered by disease. The realization didn't diminish the tragedy of Daniel's death, but it shifted something in Callahan's perception. His hatred of all working dogs had been misplaced. A convenient focus for grief, too. Overwhelming to process directly. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was Major Lewis. Sergeant Callahan, I wanted to update you on Sentinel's situation, the officer said without preamble. We've conducted a preliminary review based on the circumstances of his recovery, and Dr. Reed's initial assessment, Callahan felt himself tense. And, given the trauma of the flood, the loss of his primary handler, and the extended period without proper care, there's concern about his suitability for continued military service. Lewis paused. In cases like this, we typically evaluate for potential civilian placement. "You're retiring him," Callahan translated. "Potentially. It's not official yet, but I wanted you to know it's under consideration. Because of what happened to him, or because he sought me out?" Lewis's hesitation spoke volumes. Both factors are relevant. Military working dogs form intense bonds with their handlers. When that bond is broken traumatically, some never fully recover their training focus. Add to that his apparent fixation on you. "I see," Callahan said, a strange mix of emotions rising in his chest. "There's something else," Lewis continued. "We found Sergeant Wilson's personal effects in the recovered transport vehicle. Among them was a letter addressed to you, never mailed. Obviously. I'm having it sent to the station." After ending the call, Callahan sat motionless at the records desk, the open file before him momentarily forgotten. The possibility of Sentinel being retired and what that might mean stirred thoughts he wasn't ready to examine too closely. Instead, he gathered his files and drove to the animal hospital again. This time, Dr. Reed led him to an outdoor enclosure behind the clinic where Sentinel was being allowed supervised exercise. The transformation was remarkable. Though still thin, the dog moved with greater energy, alert to every sound and movement. When he spotted Callahan, he trotted over immediately, posture shifting from casual exploration to focused attention. "He's doing much better," Dr. Reed observed. "I think he could be released tomorrow, provided he has proper care." Callahan knelt to Sentinel's level, allowing the dog to approach with gentle dignity. Sentinel pressed his muzzle into Callahan's outstretched hand, then sat, looking up at him with those intelligent amber eyes. "What do you think, boy?" Callahan asked quietly. "Ready to get out of here?" Sentinel's ears perked forward at the question, head tilting slightly as if genuinely considering the query. "I've never seen a dog like him," Dr. Reed commented. "The intelligence, the focus, it's exceptional even for a military working dog. His trainer was using my son's personal items during his search and rescue training," Callahan said, the words coming easier than he expected. "That's why he sought me out after the flood. He recognized my scent." Dr. Reed's expression softened with understanding. "Sometimes the universe works in mysterious ways, Sergeant Callahan." Callahan spent the next hour in the exercise yard with Sentinel, watching as the dog gradually relaxed his military bearing, revealing glimpses of playfulness despite his weakened condition. At one point, Sentinel found a tennis ball and brought it to Callahan, dropping it at his feet with an expectant look. "You want to play?" "Huh." Callahan tossed the ball gently across the yard, mindful of the dog's recovery. Sentinel retrieved it with surprising speed, returning it precisely to Callahan's hand. They continued this exchange until Dr. Reed insisted Sentinel needed to rest. "I'll be back tomorrow morning," Callahan promised as Sentinel was led back to his kennel. "First thing." As he drove home in the gathering dusk, Callahan found himself making mental notes of things he would need dog food. Bowls, a bed. He caught himself mid-thought, realizing he'd already made a decision he hadn't consciously acknowledged. At home, he walked through his quiet house with new eyes, seeing it as Sentinel might. The spare bedroom that had gathered dust for years, the fenced backyard, unused since he'd stopped hosting department barbecues after Daniel's death, the empty spaces that had reflected his solitary existence for so long. Tomorrow would bring decisions and changes. Tonight, for the first time in 15 years, Michael Callahan found himself looking forward to the morning. The letter from James Wilson arrived at the station early the next morning, delivered by an Air Force courier in a plain manila envelope. Callahan stared at it for a long moment before slipping it into his pocket. Unopened. Whatever Wilson had wanted to tell him would have to wait a little longer. His priority now was bringing Sentinel home. He'd spent the previous evening clearing out the spare room, purchasing supplies from the pet store on Main Street, ignoring the shocked looks from townspeople who knew his history, and even fixing a loose section of his backyard fence. After 15 years of keeping his home as unchanging as a museum, the activity felt strangely liberating. The morning dawned clear and hot, the Arizona sun already baking the flood-dampened earth into a steamy haze by 8 a.m. Callahan arrived at the animal hospital just as Dr. Reed was unlocking the front doors. "Someone's eager," she commented with a small smile. "He's already had breakfast and a morning checkup. All vitals normal. I've prepared his discharge papers and medication instructions." Sentinel was waiting in the examination room, sitting at perfect attention. When Callahan entered, the dog's entire demeanor changed. His tail swept the floor in a rhythmic wave, and his ears perked forward with unmistakable recognition. "Hey there," Callahan said, kneeling to the dog's level. "Ready to go home." The word home seemed to resonate with Sentinel. He stood, moving forward to press his muzzle gently against Callahan's hand. "Doctor." Reed reviewed the aftercare instructions: antibiotics twice daily, special high-calorie food until he regained weight, limited exercise for the first week, and a follow-up appointment in 7 days. Callahan listened attentively, mentally cataloging each requirement. "The Air Force left his service vest and paperwork," she added, handing over a canvas bag. "Major Lewis called this morning. Said the retirement paperwork is being processed, but he's officially released to your care in the meantime." "Thank you," Callahan said, surprised by the emotion thickening his voice. "For everything." "Just doing my job," Dr. Reed replied with a warm smile. "Though I'll admit, it's not every day I get to witness something like this. You two found each other for a reason, I think." Outside, Callahan helped Sentinel into the back seat of his personal truck, noting how the dog moved with more strength than the day before. On the drive home, he found himself continually checking the rearview mirror, where Sentinel sat with dignified calm, watching the passing scenery with alert interest. As they turned onto Sycamore Street, Callahan noticed Martha Wilson sitting on her front porch. She raised a hand in greeting as he pulled into his driveway, and he found himself waving back a neighborly gesture that would have been unthinkable a week ago. "Come on," he said to Sentinel, opening the truck's rear door. "Let's get you settled." The German Shepherd stepped carefully from the vehicle, pausing to survey his new surroundings. His gaze moved methodically from the house to the yard to the street beyond, ears swiveling to capture every sound. "This is home now," Callahan said, feeling oddly self-conscious. "If you want it to be." Sentinel looked up at him with those intelligent amber eyes, then walked deliberately to Callahan's side, pressing against his leg in silent acceptance. Inside, Callahan watched as Sentinel explored the house with meticulous attention, sniffing each room before returning to Callahan as if reporting his findings. When they reached Daniel's old room, however, the dog stopped at the threshold, suddenly alert. Callahan had avoided this room for years, entering only to dust occasionally, keeping it preserved as a shrine to his lost son. Now, seeing it through Sentinel's eyes, he recognized the unhealthy nature of his grief. This room, frozen in time, represented his refusal to move forward. "It's okay," he said, more to himself than to Sentinel. "You can go in." The German shepherd entered cautiously, nose working overtime as he detected the lingering scents of a boy long gone. He circled the room slowly, pausing at the bed, the bookshelf, the desk with its collection of model planes. Finally, he stopped at the closet, looking back at Callahan with an expression that seemed almost questioning. "What is it, boy?" Sentinel pawed gently at the closet door. Callahan stepped forward and slid it open, revealing shelves of neatly folded clothes and boxes of childhood treasures. On the top shelf sat a shoebox labeled K9 Unit in a child's careful handwriting. Callahan had forgotten it existed. With hands that suddenly trembled, he took down the box and opened it. Inside were newspaper clippings about police dogs, trading cards featuring famous K9 officers, and a small photo album. Callahan opened the album to find pictures of Daniel at various police department events, always gravitating toward the working dogs, his face alight with joy. "He loved them," Callahan said softly, the realization washing over him anew. He never got the chance to follow that dream. Sentinel sat beside him, watching intently as Callahan turned the pages. When a small object fell from between the photos, the dog's attention immediately fixed on it. A weathered dog tag, engraved with the name Rex and a police badge number. The demonstration dog. Callahan remembered aloud. The handler let him keep this after that school visit. As Sentinel continued to stare at the tag, a strange intuition prompted Callahan to hold it out. "Is this what you're looking for?" The German shepherd sniffed the tag carefully, then looked up at Callahan with such focused intensity that a chill ran down his spine. It was almost as if Sentinel recognized the object, though that was impossible. "Did James use this for your training?" Callahan wondered aloud, remembering what Major Lewis had said about scent imprinting. The moment was interrupted by a knock at the front door. Callahan tucked the dog tag into his pocket and went to answer it. Sentinel, following close behind, Martha Wilson stood on his porch, leaning on her cane. "Thought I'd come meet your new housemate properly," she said without preamble. "Martha," Callahan began, suddenly aware of how much remained unsaid between them. "Save it," she interrupted, though gently. "Some things don't need saying." Her eyes moved to Sentinel, who had positioned himself at Callahan's side. "My word, he looks just like the dogs James worked with." "He was trained by your son," Callahan said. "That's why he came here, to my house. James used Daniel's things during his training." Martha's eyes welled with tears. "My boy always was clever that way. Said sometimes healing comes at you sideways." She took a hesitant step forward. "May I?" Callahan nodded, and Martha extended a gnarled hand to Sentinel, who sniffed it politely before allowing her to stroke his head. "He would have been pleased," she said softly. "James, I mean, to see something good come from—" She didn't finish the sentence. "Would you like to come in?" Callahan offered, surprising himself. "I've got coffee on." Martha looked equally surprised, but nodded. "I'd like that. Michael, been waiting 15 years for you to ask." As they turned to enter the house, a sudden sharp crack echoed from the direction of the creek, the sound of waterlogged wood giving way. Sentinel's head snapped up, ears forward, body instantly alert. Before either human could react, the sound came again, followed by frightened shouts. Sentinel bolted, pushing past them with unexpected strength, leaping from the porch and racing toward the source of the distress. "Sentinel!" Callahan called, but the dog was already halfway down the street, moving with purpose despite his weakened condition. "What in heaven's name?" Martha began. "The creek bank must have collapsed," Callahan said, already moving to follow. "Someone's in trouble." What happened next would test everything Callahan's newfound connection with Sentinel, his ability to face his deepest fears, and whether 15 years of grief could truly begin to heal in the space of a few extraordinary days. Callahan sprinted after Sentinel, his police training kicking in despite his years behind a desk. Martha called after him, but her words were lost as he rounded the corner toward Sycamore Creek. The normally placid waterway had transformed during the recent storms, swollen beyond its banks and churning with debris carried downstream from the mountains. Ahead, Sentinel's tan and black form moved with single-minded purpose, his weakened condition seemingly forgotten as he raced toward the creek's edge. Callahan could now see what had drawn the dog's attention. A section of the bank had collapsed, taking with it part of the wooden observation deck popular with local fishermen. Two children clung to the splintered remains, their small bodies already half submerged in the rushing water. "Help!" a woman screamed from the shore, held back by another adult as she tried to reach the children. "My babies. Please, someone help them." Callahan grabbed his phone, thumbing the emergency contact for dispatch even as he continued running. "This is Callahan. Water rescue needed at Sycamore Creek Bridge. 2 children in the water. Hurry." By the time he reached the scene, Sentinel was already at the water's edge, barking commandingly at the children, who appeared to be around 8 or 9 years old, a boy and a girl, possibly twins. "Hold on," Callahan shouted to them. "Help is coming." But even as the words left his mouth, he could see the precarious wooden structure shifting, threatening to collapse entirely under the pressure of the current. The nearest fire station was at least 10 minutes away. The children didn't have that long. Without conscious thought, Callahan kicked off his shoes and waded into the creek. The cold water shocked him, still frigid from mountain runoff despite the hot morning sun. The current pulled at his legs with frightening strength as he moved deeper. "Stay where you are," he called to the children. "I'm coming to get you." The little girl sobbed, her hands white-knuckled as she gripped the broken railing. The boy appeared slightly calmer, though his face was pale with fear. Sentinel paced anxiously on the shore, watching Callahan's progress with intense focus. When the water reached Callahan's chest, making forward movement increasingly difficult, the dog suddenly plunged into the creek. "Sentinel, no," Callahan called, fearing for the animal's already compromised health. But the German shepherd swam with powerful strokes, cutting through the current with far greater efficiency than Callahan could manage. Within moments, he had reached the children. To Callahan's amazement, Sentinel didn't try to pull the children from their precarious perch. Instead, he maneuvered himself beneath the broken deck, providing additional support with his body while barking encouragingly at the terrified children. "He's helping!" the boy called out. "He's holding it up." Callahan pushed forward with renewed determination, finally reaching the damaged structure. Up close, he could see that Sentinel had positioned himself strategically, bracing the most unstable section with his back while keeping his head above water. "Good boy," Callahan said, meeting the dog's eyes with newfound respect. "I've got it now." He assessed the situation quickly. The girl was closest, her grip already weakening. "Sweetheart, I need you to let go and come to me," he said, keeping his voice calm despite the urgency. "I'm scared," she whimpered. "I know you are, but I won't let anything happen to you." Callahan extended his arms. "Just let go and I'll catch you. My dog is helping hold everything up." The girl looked at Sentinel, who gave a reassuring bark despite the strain evident in his posture. With a small cry, she released her grip and half fell into Callahan's waiting arms. "Good girl," he said, holding her securely against his chest. "Now we're going to move very slowly to the shore, fighting the current." Callahan carried the girl to safety, where her mother waited with outstretched arms. But as he handed the child over, a sickening crack echoed across the water. Turning back, Callahan saw the remaining structure shift dramatically. The boy cried out in terror as his section of decking tilted toward the water. Sentinel barked frantically, still trying to brace the collapsing wood with his body. Without hesitation, Callahan plunged back into the creek. The current seemed stronger now, the water colder, but he pushed forward with desperate energy. He was still several yards away when the structure gave way completely. "No!" he shouted as both boy and dog disappeared beneath the churning surface. For one terrible moment, the creek revealed nothing but swirling debris. Then Sentinel's head broke the surface, the boy's shirt clenched firmly but gently in his teeth. The dog swam powerfully toward the middle of the creek, away from the dangerous debris but fighting a current that threatened to sweep them both downstream. Callahan changed direction, angling to intercept them. The cold was seeping into his muscles now, making each movement more difficult than the last. Memories of Daniel flashed through his mind, not the tragedy this time, but the joy that preceded it. His son running ahead on a hiking trail, laughing as he splashed in this very creek during happier summers. "I'm coming," he called, though whether to the boy, to Sentinel, or to the ghost of his son, he couldn't have said. 20 feet from shore, disaster struck. A large branch, carried by the current, slammed into Sentinel's side. The dog yelped, but maintained his grip on the boy. However, the impact pushed them toward a tangle of flood debris that had formed a dangerous strainer near the opposite bank, a death trap that would allow water through, but trap solid objects against it with the force of the current. Callahan redoubled his efforts, lungs burning as he swam toward them. He reached the boy just as Sentinel was being pulled toward the strainer. Grabbing the child with one arm, he reached for Sentinel's collar with the other. "Let go, boy," he gasped. "I've got him now." For a brief moment, their eyes met human and canine, a silent communication passing between them. Sentinel released the boy's shirt, but was immediately caught by the current. His weakened body swept against the debris dam. "Sentinel!" Callahan shouted. but he couldn't reach the dog without endangering the child in his arms. With a wrenching decision, he turned toward shore, swimming diagonally against the current to carry the boy to safety. Willing hands pulled them from the water. The boy coughed and sputtered, but was otherwise unharmed. His mother wrapped him in a fierce embrace, sobbing with relief. "My dog," Callahan gasped, turning back toward the creek. "He's trapped in the strainer." Sentinel was barely visible now, pinned against the tangle of branches and debris by the relentless force of the water. Though he struggled, each movement seemed weaker than the last. His head remained above water, but just barely. Without conscious thought, Callahan found himself back in the creek, swimming toward the strainer. Distantly, he heard sirens approaching the fire department's water rescue team finally arriving. But they would be too late for Sentinel. "Hang on. Boy," he called, fighting through water that seemed to have arms designed specifically to hold him back. As he neared the debris dam, the danger became immediately apparent. The current pushed against his body with crushing force, trying to pin him alongside Sentinel. Using every ounce of his police training, Callahan maneuvered to approach from downstream, grabbing onto the tangle of branches to anchor himself. Sentinel's eyes found his, and in them Callahan saw not fear, but trust, absolute and unwavering. It was a look he'd seen only once before, in Daniel's eyes, each time his son had placed his small hand in Callahan's larger one, secure in the belief that his father would keep him safe. "I've got you," Callahan promised, reaching through the branches to grasp Sentinel's collar. "I won't let you go." The dog whimpered softly as Callahan worked to free him, carefully breaking away branches and pulling debris from around the trapped animal. Every second was a battle against the current, which seemed determined to claim them both. Finally, with one last mighty effort, Callahan pulled Sentinel free. But as they began to move away from the strainer, he realized his own strength was failing. The cold had seeped deep into his muscles, and the exertion had left him dangerously weak. He could barely keep himself afloat, let alone support Sentinel's weight. In that moment, with the shore seeming impossibly distant, Callahan felt a strange calm descend. If this was how it ended, at least he would go trying to save a life, trying to save this particular life that had so unexpectedly become precious to him. "I'm sorry, Daniel," he whispered, thinking not of his failure 15 years ago, but of how he had failed to live fully in the years since. Then, suddenly, Sentinel was moving beside him, no longer a burden but a support. Despite his ordeal, the dog swam with renewed purpose, pressing his body against Callahan's, helping to keep him afloat. Together, they began to make slow progress toward the shore. By the time they reached shallow water, the rescue team had arrived. Hands reached for them, pulling them onto dry land where they collapsed side by side, both gasping for breath. "Sergeant Callahan, can you hear me?" A paramedic's voice seemed to come from very far away. Callahan turned his head, seeking Sentinel. The dog lay motionless beside him, eyes closed, breathing shallow, reaching out with the last of his strength. Callahan placed his hand on the wet fur of Sentinel's neck. "Stay with me," he whispered. "Please." As darkness closed in around the edges of his vision, Callahan felt something he hadn't experienced in 15 years, a desperate prayer forming in his heart, not for himself, but for the dog who had somehow broken through walls he'd thought impenetrable. In that moment, before consciousness slipped away entirely, Michael Callahan finally understood what Martha Wilson had been trying to tell him for years. Sometimes healing comes sideways, when you're not looking for it, in forms you never expected. And sometimes it comes with 4 legs and unwavering loyalty. Callahan awoke to the steady beep of hospital monitors and the antiseptic smell that marked all medical facilities, regardless of whether their patients walked on 2 legs or 4, blinking against the harsh fluorescent lighting. He struggled to orient himself. His throat felt raw. His muscles ached with a bone-deep weariness, and his mind was foggy with what he assumed were pain medications. "Welcome back to the land of the living, Mike." Chief Williams sat in a vinyl chair beside the bed. His uniform rumpled as if he'd been there for hours. "How long?" Callahan croaked. "About 6 hours," Williams replied, offering a cup of water with a straw. "Moderate hypothermia, exhaustion, and a cracked rib from where that branch hit you. Doctor says you'll make a full recovery, though you might be desk-bound for a couple weeks." Callahan took a sip of water, memories flooding back the creek. The children. Sentinel trapped in the debris. "The dog," he said urgently, trying to sit up. "Sentinel, is he?" Williams placed a restraining hand on his shoulder. "Easy there. Your 4-legged hero is alive." The relief that washed over Callahan was so profound it left him momentarily speechless. "Though, I won't lie to you," Williams continued, his expression sobering. "He's in rough shape. Between the exposure he suffered before, his weakened condition, and then the creek. The vet says it could go either way." "I need to see him," Callahan said, already pulling at the IV line in his arm. "Whoa! Hold on there, cowboy." Williams tightened his grip. "You're not going anywhere just yet. Doctor says at least overnight for observation. You don't understand. He needs me there." Williams studied him for a long moment. "You know, in 20 years of working together, I've never seen you like this. Not about anything. Certainly not about a dog." Callahan met his gaze steadily. "Things change." "Yes, they do," Williams agreed, unexpectedly. "Which is why I've already spoken to your doctor and the veterinarian. If your vitals remain stable for the next hour, we can arrange a brief visit. You'll go in a wheelchair with a nurse and come straight back." "Thank you," Callahan said, genuine gratitude in his voice. "Don't thank me yet. There's a whole crowd of reporters outside wanting to talk to the hero cop and his miraculous dog. Story's already gone viral on social media. Some tourist caught the whole rescue on video." Callahan groaned. "Tell them I'm in a coma," Williams chuckled. "Already did, but they're persistent, especially since it's you." "What's that supposed to mean?" "Mike, you've been stone-cold Callahan for 15 years. The man who hates dogs more than anyone in Arizona suddenly risking his life for one. That's a story people want to hear." Before Callahan could respond, the door opened to admit Martha Wilson, leaning heavily on her cane. "Well, look at you," she said, her sharp eyes assessing him. "Still too stubborn to die, I see." "Martha?" Williams nodded, standing. "I'll leave you two to catch up. Mike, I'll check on that other matter we discussed." When the door closed behind the chief, Martha settled carefully into the vacated chair. "Those children you saved are fine. By the way, not a scratch on them, though their mother might never let them out of her sight again." "Good," Callahan said. "That's good." A long silence stretched between them, filled with 15 years of things unsaid. "I read the letter," Martha finally said, pulling a folded paper from her pocket. "The one my James wrote to you. The Air Force brought it to me when they couldn't find you here." Callahan's chest tightened. What did it say? Martha unfolded the paper with gnarled fingers. It's dated 2 days before the flood. He knew Sentinel's training was almost complete, that the dog would be assigned somewhere soon. She cleared her throat and began to read. "Sergeant Callahan, you don't know me, but I've known about you and your son Daniel since I was a teenager. My mother, Martha Wilson, has lived next door to you for nearly 30 years. She was there the day of the accident, and she's watched you every day since a good man trapped in grief that's calcified into something hard and unyielding. I'm writing because I've been training a dog who might change that. His name is Sentinel, and he's the most remarkable animal I've ever worked with. For the past 8 months, I've been using items that belong to Daniel, things my mother saved in Sentinel's search and rescue training. The scent of your son has become linked in Sentinel's mind with his highest purpose, finding and saving those who are lost. Military working dogs usually go where they're assigned, serving with handlers they've never met before. But occasionally, very occasionally, a dog chooses its person a connection so strong that breaking it would damage the animal's ability to work effectively. I believe Sentinel has formed such a connection, not with me, but with the scent of your family, with Daniel's memory, and by extension, with you. By the time you receive this letter, Sentinel will be transferred to his permanent assignment. But I wanted you to know that somewhere in this world, your son's memory is being honored in the most fitting way I could imagine through a dog dedicated to saving others from the fate Daniel suffered. Perhaps someday, if the universe aligns just right, you might even meet him. With deepest respect, James Wilson, USAF K-9 Division. Martha refolded the letter, her eyes bright with unshed tears. He didn't know it would happen like this. Of course, the flood, his death, Sentinel finding you. But James always did have a sense about these things. Hey, Callahan swallowed against the tightness in his throat. "I need to see him. Martha, Sentinel. They say he might not make it." "I know," she said gently. "That's why I brought this." From her large handbag, she withdrew Daniel's dog tag, the one Callahan had found in the shoebox. James used this more than anything else in Sentinel's training. Said the dog responded to it like nothing he'd ever seen. She pressed the metal tag into Callahan's palm. Healing comes in the strangest packages. Michael, sometimes it's a letter never meant to be delivered. Sometimes it's a neighbor who never stops trying. And sometimes it's a stubborn dog who sits in the rain for 3 days. Callahan finished, closing his fingers around the tag. Martha smiled, the lines in her face softening. Exactly. 1 hour later, true to his word, Chief Williams returned with a wheelchair and a nurse. Together, they helped Callahan navigate the short journey to the veterinary clinic connected to the hospital, a trip that felt longer than any he'd ever taken. Dr. Reed met them at the entrance, her expression carefully professional. "He's stable, but critical," she said without preamble. "The next 24 hours will be decisive." She led them to a quiet room in the back, where Sentinel lay on a padded table, an IV in his foreleg, an oxygen mask fitted over his muzzle. Monitors beeped softly, tracking his vital signs. His powerful body, so recently strong enough to save 2 children and a grown man, looked diminished somehow, vulnerable in a way that pierced Callahan's heart. "Can I touch him?" he asked. "Dr." Reed nodded. "Talk to him, too. He might be able to hear you." The nurse wheeled Callahan to Sentinel's side. With gentle fingers, he stroked the dog's head, felt the soft fur of his ears, traced the distinctive markings around his eyes. "Hey there, buddy," he said softly. "I hear you're giving these folks some trouble." Beneath his hand, he felt the slightest shift, Sentinel's ear twitching at the sound of his voice. "That's it," Callahan encouraged. "I'm right here. Not going anywhere." He opened his palm, revealing Daniel's dog tag. Carefully, he placed it where Sentinel could catch its scent. "I brought something for you. Something familiar." The effect was immediate and astonishing. Sentinel's nostrils flared, his breathing quickened, and his eyes, those intelligent amber eyes, fluttered open, focusing with visible effort on Callahan's face. "Well, I'll be damned," Dr. Reed breathed. Callahan leaned closer, heedless of his own pain. "That's it, boy. Come back to me. We've got things to do, you and I." Sentinel's tail moved in the faintest suggestion of a wag. His tongue emerged to weakly lick Callahan's hand, an unmistakable gesture of recognition and affection. In that moment, something that had been broken in Michael Callahan for 15 long years began, finally, to heal. Life has a way of bringing us exactly what we need, even when it comes in packages we initially want to reject. For Sergeant Callahan, healing arrived in the form of a loyal German shepherd who refused to give up on him, despite being turned away in the pouring rain. We've all built walls after tragedy struck, walls we believed would protect us from further pain. But those same walls often keep out the very love and connection we desperately need. Sometimes it takes a silent sentinel, patiently waiting through our storms, to show us what true loyalty looks like. Martha Wilson understood this truth. Healing comes sideways when we're not looking for it. Whether you've lost a child, a spouse, or pieces of yourself along life's difficult journey, remember that second chances often arrive in unexpected forms. They require courage to accept the courage to open a door we've kept locked for years, to extend a hand to someone or something that might help us carry our burden.